Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents, a new offering on Village TV. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is an organization committed to peace, social justice, economic equality, and a clean environment. For the duration of the lockdown, instead of its usual 2 meetings a month, Concerned Citizens will broadcast 2 programs a month on this channel. Our programs will feature films, lectures, and debates on topics related to our mission. We hope you enjoy today's program.
Welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents. Our program at this time each week. March is Women's History Month, when Concerned Citizens usually offers a program involving the history of millions of women, but not this year. This March, our program is about the present and future of roughly 1 billion women, once deep in poverty, but now able to lift their families out of it. It's titled Small Loans, Big Dreams, Women, Microcredit, and Defeating Global Poverty. Our speaker, Alex Counts, is a top expert on microcredit. He founded and for 18 years was president of the Grameen Foundation, with the support of microcredit pioneer, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus, founder of the Grameen Bank of Bangladesh. Alex will tell us what Grameen and microcredit mean, what they and Dr. Yunus already achieved, and explain the future of their template now used worldwide. After graduating from Cornell, Alex was a Fulbright scholar in Bangladesh, studied Grameen Bank's innovative poverty solutions, trained under Yunus, and worked in microfinance and poverty reduction for 10 years, mostly in rural Bangladesh. His book's titles tell a lot about him. He began with Small Loans, Big Dreams, How Muhammad Yunus and Microfinance Are Changing the World, and Voices from the Field. His 2019 book is Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind. And in 2020, When in Doubt, Ask for More. You can buy those and get an inscription signed by the author if you visit the website that'll be on screen. I met Alex, by the way, in 1989 when he became legislative director of Results, the world's leading group of grassroots advocates for ending hunger and poverty. And I was in Results Los Angeles group. So I can be sure this will be an expert and inspiring talk by my former coach and inspiring nudge, Alex Counts. So let's start with this question, Alex. First, what is microcredit and how have you seen it work around the world?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for having me on this program and for that kind introduction. Microcredit and more broadly microfinance, which includes not just credit, but savings and insurance services brought to the poor, is basically a strategy of self-help, of using financial services to allow people in conditions of poverty, especially women, to emerge out of those conditions largely through their own efforts, but facilitated by ethical financial transactions. And, you know, we're talking here about, in a Bangladesh setting, a loan of $100 or $200, or the ability to slowly build up a savings account of $500 over a few years, or insure your crop against a loss that, you know, again, you might just have 1 acre of land. Those kinds of transactions. And then in the US context where microfinance has been tried, you know, it's at maybe a few $1,000s, but still very small amounts. And these can be transformative in people's ability to run a business, educate their children, repair their home, various, you know, essential life things. And I've seen this work extremely well in Bangladesh and India, to some degree in Africa, certain African countries and other Asian countries, urban areas of Latin America, and increasingly in urban areas of the United States. And basically what their microfinance is premised on is a kind of a new mindset around how do you address poverty. If you look many decades, poverty was said, well, you need to create jobs for people. So you support companies and businesses to create more jobs, or you have government programs that address the deficits people have in terms of nutrition or education. And so the poor aren't the actors, they're the kind of recipients, and it's trying to address their deficits as human beings. And microcredit, microfinance take a very different approach. They see the poor as actors who are actually engaged in trying to survive. And by kind of putting more money and support behind their survival activities, you can actually give them a pathway to get beyond survival to being stable and even thriving. And so that whole doing ethical financial transactions to support self-help and to putting the poor kind of building on their strengths, not kind of trying to address their weaknesses. So it was quite a revolutionary approach. And then one of the biggest things, as you mentioned in your introduction, is to focus on these transactions on women, to see women as the most reliable financial partner to microcredit institutions, to make sure that these transactions truly benefit the family, especially the children, so that poverty is kind of wiped out in this generation and isn't handed down to the next generation.
So I've heard we're using sort of synonymous terms. We used microcredit so far, and it's also called, I understand, microfinance or also micro enterprise, right? So how did it evolve, and who were its early pioneers? And specifically, please tell us about Nobel Peace Prize laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus. How did he either discover or create innovative microcredit solutions to poverty?
Sure, and it's not to confuse people, but microcredit is probably the dominant product of microfinance. Think of a bank. A bank might offer savings, loans, other services, but in this case, the biggest product, the most popular product, is the loan. But insurance and savings are also important to many poor people, and so that's why we talk more broadly about microfinance. But the human beings have been exchanging financial loans and savings and doing financial transactions individually and with institutions for millennia. This is not, and some of those transactions are mutually beneficial to all parties. Some of them are exploitative in nature. Where Muhammad Yunus came in, and a few other innovators like Ella Bhatt in India and Pancho Otero in Bolivia came in the 70s and early 80s, is they tried to design banks in a kind of radical way that was designed around the needs of poor people, especially poor women in their societies, and which required a major re-engineering of banking, especially around collateral, but many other things as well. How do you do banking with people that can't read and write? Well, you need to do it in a different way. And so Muhammad Yunus, one of the early innovators, sometimes called the father of microcredit, the modern microcredit movement. I've never heard him use that term, but a lot of people use it as a shorthand. Is he was teaching, he was a Bangladeshi, raised in Bangladesh, but got his PhD at Vanderbilt in Tennessee here in the US, went home after independence to help build up his country, very idealistic. And yet he was teaching economics, and he saw people dying of starvation, dropping dead outside his classroom. He's like, these theories seem to be too relevant. And he began talking to poor people about what was going on in their lives. Not what was in a textbook. And he found that many of them had skills, marketable skills, but they didn't have the capital to put those skills to work and to earn a decent income. And women and men, he hadn't yet realized that women were the best partners. And he just said, let me try to get a bank to lend to you, or I'll lend you out of my own pocket, very small loans to begin with. And he saw that many of them were thriving, and it just was an experiment. And he said, and he kept asking the banks to take this on as a new product line, small loans to very poor people in his country. And they thought it was a ridiculous idea. So he gave up convincing them and created a bank, first a project and then a fully fledged bank in his country, designed around how do you meet the financial needs, savings, credit, insurance of the poor, and then ultimately focused mainly on the poor women of Bangladesh. And then some of these other innovators came up, borrowed his idea or developed it independently and again, to be the first one to do this in any country, even if it's been improved in Bangladesh or Bolivia, it takes a lot of guts. But there were people that stepped forward and did that. And then someone we both know, Sam Daly Harris, started a whole kind of global campaign to back people who were taking this idea and trying to bring it to, all corners of the world where poverty existed, and created an 11-year campaign to expand access to microcredit. And despite only having a shoestring budget, they really beat the drum and got more and more people behind this idea, and it grew exponentially, and has been a big reason why poverty has come down so much in the world, although due to the pandemic that has been reversed temporarily. But microfinance, I think, has been a major force in the kind of reduction, unheralded by many people, of poverty in places like Bangladesh, like India, and globally.
Alex, I heard you use the words, or maybe drop the words, we didn't maybe notice them. First out of his own pocket, you said.
Yeah.
What was his experience there, and how did he lend, and how did the women perform?
Yeah, well, he, famously, he lent $27 to 42 women in Bangladesh in 1976, just because he had no idea what would happen. But he said, you only find out if you do it. And the loans were repaid. And now a dollar was worth more then in the U.S. and especially in Bangladesh. So but it was enough to take someone who was making stools and selling them in the market, who had to borrow from a loan shark to get the bamboo to make the stools with. But for the first time, she could buy this bamboo herself, not through a trader or a loan shark. And then he was like, this can't all be relying on me. So all the loans after that, he tried to do it through an institutional way, initially by getting a bank to do it, and he would serve as a guarantor, and then ultimately built up his own bank. But those very first loans, he didn't, he's a man of action, if you know Muhammad Yunus. And so when he saw these 42 people that seemed to have a need that could be addressed by credit, he just took the money out of his pocket, lent it to them. And that started the revolution that now, later swept the world.
So a couple of quick questions. In today's dollars, how much were the amounts of the early loans, and can you give another maybe 2 or 3 examples of the micro enterprise that the borrowers started, for which they needed that money and could not do before?
I once did the math, trying to adjust all the exchange rates and inflation. I think you were talking about basically borrowing the equivalent today of maybe $25 or $30, so still very small, but this is what people needed. So making crafts and stools is one. Food processing, the puffed rice that the thing we call kind of Rice Krispies, that's actually a very popular food that people take rice and they puff it, and then they sell in the marketplace for more than the rice, they purchase the rice for. So a lot of things like that. Buy a sewing machine, and if you have that skill, and then you can, sew clothes and sell them in the marketplace, or repair clothes. Or just something simple as buying some chickens, paying off the loan by selling the eggs. And then at the end of it, you have a small kind of chicken farm, or buying a cow and selling the milk to pay the installments. But at one point, they just identified 500 different businesses that Grameen borrowers invested in, some of which were just slight variations on others. But it just, people, again, when the government's not going to bail you out of poverty, and when there aren't enough jobs, you get very creative about creating a job. You look at what the marketplace needs, and if you see a niche for yourself, you make it, and then with a little extra money to buy things at a better terms, to then sell or manufacture, it can make all the difference.
So I'll refrain from mentioning the joke about the crazy uncle and the treatment, and the punchline of which is because we needed the eggs. I think most people know that. So that the enterprise are what economists call both goods and services that are needed.
Mhm.
So let me just ask you this now. Uh, what is it about you personally, your background, your values, that got you personally involved in microcredit?
Well, I mean, I was a couple things. I was just always interested in doing things where I could work with other people and do something constructive. I didn't want to just be a critic of the status quo. I wanted to, how can we work to, create something better than the status quo? And so in college, that led me to Results, a group that you and I were involved in, and I'm still involved in. And they were advocating for many practical solutions to poverty at the policy level, including microcredit and microfinance. And also, I was raised by, kind of helping professionals, social workers and psychiatrists and doctors. So I had a strong service orientation from my earliest days, but also, I grew up in the 80s where, greed is good and business is good. And so I was thinking, how do you try to create social value, but do it in a business-like way? You take the lessons from the business world and apply them in a social change context. And so, that led me to discovering what Muhammad Yunus was doing, and it just made so much sense. And then when I was still in college, I wrote him a letter at the urging of my internship supervisor when I was interning at Results one semester. And I just said, I want to dedicate my life to your work. And after I get done with Cornell, another semester, 3 semesters at that point. And Muhammad Yunus had the generosity of spirit to write a 19-year-old and tell him, sure, get your degree and come work with us, and we'll find a way for you to contribute to this organization, to this movement. And I spent basically 3 decades working with him in different ways, and to some extent continue to this day. Because he would have placed responsibility with me and trust me after I earned his trust, and after I learned Bengali. I really immersed myself in the culture of Grameen and the culture of Bangladesh, and that meant a lot to him and his colleagues. I did my work. I suffered the diseases that you ultimately get immune to in living in a place like Bangladesh, and so I had my battle scars and all, but he invited me into what was a global movement that was really, emerging, as much as anywhere from Bangladesh. And again, it just was a blast. And it just came from a kind of a basic idea in college that really was an outgrowth of my volunteer work at the time with Results.
So you landed a Fulbright, and you
Yeah.
spent a lot of years in Bangladesh. Were there a lot of Fulbright scholars in Bangladesh at the time?
No, it was kind of a backwater, really, in so many ways. Bangladesh. So I applied for the Fulbright. I'm a big supporter of the Fulbright program. I think that any of your listeners who are or know people in their 20s, once the pandemic is past us, it's the 20s are a great time to get out and explore the world, expand your horizons, and the Fulbright program is an amazing way to do it. But there were only 4 Fulbrighters in Bangladesh for the year I was there, the academic year 1988-89. But I didn't want to mix with Fulbrighters or frankly any Americans. I wanted to immerse myself in Bangladesh and Grameen. So there could have been a lot more. I could have been the only one. It really wouldn't have mattered to me. But it's a small program. A lot of Fulbrighters go to Europe and India and larger countries. But there was a small contingent of us there, and I was just so focused on kind of the down payment on my learning about Grameen, and also about the how do you train people to take this idea into other contexts. Once my Bengali got good enough, I translated their training manual that they used for their own internal staff at Grameen into English for the first time, just as a small, again, down payment on what would later be many more resources available to people that wanted to take the Grameen idea to other countries. But you have to start somewhere, and that's what I did in my Fulbright year. I came back and worked for Results for 3 years, and then I went back to Bangladesh for another 5, where I was able to really deepen my understanding and kind of integration into that organization and that by that point kind of emerging global movement.
Well, good. Let's look a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of how microcredit works. Microcredit usually includes charging interest
Yeah.
on poor borrowers' loans. Is that necessary or ethical?
Well, the view on that has changed over time because actually the poor have demonstrated an ability to invest and earn and pay beyond what people thought in the 70s and 80s and even 90s. But basically, the question is if the poor women need something, need a service of any kind, then the question is if you really want to bring it to big scale, you're going to need to find a lot of money to do it if it's to the extent it's subsidized. And so the price tag becomes often prohibitive, even if you have an effective solution, unless you have people willing to write big checks year after year, and government, that is the role for governments in some areas like education. But what microcredit had the insight is once they realized that if you designed the credit delivery and the peer support and supervision model the right way, that you not only get most of your money back, but people were developing a surplus that they could pay interest, pay part of the costs. And also what's interesting when you're asking for a cost share by the client of a social service, in this case, the interest, you're kind of meeting the market test, because a lot of times people will take things from nonprofits or government that they don't really need because they're free. So why don't we just take it on? But if it's a loan that needs to be repaid with interest, they're not going to take it unless they really need it. They have a plan to how to use it to benefit themselves. And so what we found is that the secret of microcredit is to provide this ethical, respectful transaction in a way that you're really helping poor manage their money, manage their cash flow, generate more revenue in a way that they're willing and able to pay for through the interest that they charge. And again, some people in microcredit have tried to charge as much as they possibly could to the poor, and that's where you're starting to get more into the loan shark territory. But microcredit programs and like Grameen, they charge enough to cover their costs, which then makes the scaling of it no problem, because since you're not losing money on every loan, you're even making a little money on each loan. There's you can reach everyone who needs it. There's no problem there. So in that way, you solve the scale problem to reach poverty, which is why microfinance has reached so many people. And yes, there needs to be some philanthropic support to start programs, but the ongoing operating costs are in most cases run by the interest. And the people take a lot of pride in this. In the case of Grameen, it's actually operated almost more like a cooperative, because the women who borrow from it and pay interest to it also own the majority of shares in it. And that's why they control the board of directors, which was quite an innovative aspect that Eunice brought in. Hasn't been used by that many other institutions. And so there's a lot of ways these organizations involve borrowers in very creative, non-traditional ways. But ultimately, if your lending is helping people get ahead, and you can charge interest to cover the costs of it, then you basically can continue to meet their needs and the needs of others without any financial constraint, and that's huge. And also by you meeting the market test, you're providing something that with a cost to it, so that people won't access it unless they really need it and have a plan for using it productively.
Good. I recall from results work introducing microcredit to Congress in the late 80s and the 90s that it was the Ford and Rockefeller foundations initially, maybe a few others, who were initially capitalizing programs, projects, and loans, and that we were using incredible repayment percentage figures up around 95%, 98%, and contrasting that with the rate of default of ordinary commercial loans of ordinary American individual and corporate borrowers. Are those fairly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, they've held up over time. Certainly repayment would temporarily drop in Bangladesh after a major natural disaster. Or in some countries where the government has urged the poor not to repay as a kind of a populist program, and so that can affect. But in general times, a good, well run microcredit program and microfinance program can have repayment that'll be in the mid to high 90s percentage wise. And especially after the poor build up some savings, then if their business takes a hit, they can just continue to make payments on their loan through accumulated savings. And then when they recover, they can start to build up their savings again. So that becomes a kind of a insurance against default. But initially, that's not what most people have. And so, so this is really how it, kind of how it grew up over time. And again, it's, it continues to, it continues to this day.
Let me combine a couple of issues in a question. First of all, why are most very poor folks who get microcredit loans women? And secondly, does microcredit necessarily include borrowers being together in groups, with all those in the group being somehow responsible to make sure that each other pays back her loan and succeeds in her small business?
Sure, and when you ask these two-part questions, if I forget one of them, you can bring me back to it. Just trying to track all this is obviously such a topic I'm passionate about. But women, at the beginning, Professor Yunus had the idea that banks were anti-poor, anti-women, and anti-illiterate, and so he wanted to address that. I was trying to make a statement more than build an institution, at least at first. So he wanted to have half of his borrowers be women and half men, just to be equal. But what he found is that the women who were borrowing, they were more, especially initially before they gained confidence, they were more cautious. They invested in lower risk businesses. They worked their businesses harder, and perhaps most important to him, they gave, when they earned their profits, they either plowed them back into the businesses, or they put them into the health and education and well-being of the family, especially the children. The men did these to some extent, but not as much as the women. And they also tended to take more risks in their business early on, and some of them failed and some succeeded. So he just said, gosh, if this is the case, then I just want to concentrate almost all of my lending on women. If they're more cautious, more risk averse, harder working, and they're going to use the money to fight poverty, and build their business. And so that became almost the standard. Now there are other programs that have had success lending more on an equal basis to men and women. But this made sense, certainly in the Bangladesh context. And the group thing is important. Now, so there are some very successful microcredit programs that don't lend in groups, and there's a way to do that. But what Professor Yunus found is that these peer groups of usually about 5 members, they have two main functions. One of which is if you're known to be someone in the village that is unethical, is going to just take this loan and abscond. People know that in the community, and they won't join your group. So it serves as a kind of a vetting. You don't have to do all complicated research on people because the community knows. And then the second thing is these groups have the role of kind of supporting the businesses, because if for the borrowers to graduate to higher loans in the next year, not just the individual needs to repay, but everyone in their group needs to repay. Or if they can't repay, that they make arrangements in a responsible way to catch up. So everyone is kind of incentivized to not only look after their own business, but to kind of help where they can the businesses of 4 other women in their community, and that helps them succeed. You have a little, kind of fan club support group there, and also it provides a kind of a peer pressure on them to do the right thing. Professor Yunus says that people in their individual behavior are often quite erratic, but in group settings we tend to be more consistent. And we're trying to win people's approval, or whatever the sociologists would say. So when people they would get their loan, and then their husband would say, well, give me the money, I want to go off and drink or buy cigarettes or something, and the woman might be tempted to curry favor with her husband. Well, that's where her group will say, no, you can't do that. That's not, you're not going to be able to pay back the loan, and so forth. So that pressure to do things the right way, rather than to fall into temptations, and that's the peer pressure to go with the peer support, and the groups again help keep people, until they reform their ways, if they're known to act unethically, they won't be able to find themselves in the group. So it kind of weeds out the bad apples in the community also.
Were the groups, Alex, also um, uh, uh, able to take advantage of training for well-being in various ways, health, educating children, maintaining the home, other things involving the well-being of the family?
Yes, in a number of ways, actually. One of the things that I would go when I was, learning with Grameen, I would go and follow the loan officers who might bike or walk 4 or 5 miles to get to a borrower's meeting. And for a lot of cases, these women would come together for an hour and a half every week on a Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. or something. And just by being in a peer group where they might spend almost all of the rest of their week with their husband and their children, to be exposed by other women in the community, you just good ideas kind of proliferate. You'd see a lot of these women talking to each other, gossiping, sharing. You can buy rice in this market for less than that place, and so you interact with your peers, which a lot of Bangladeshi women after they're married can't do. You get good ideas circulate in the community more, but also the loan officer who would have some education, at least a high school, if not college education. They would spend some time in the meetings kind of talking to the women about good health practices, good sanitation, nutrition practices, and so this is coming from a kind of authoritative figure, and so women are now assessing whether that information makes sense to them. And sometimes they would also call the leaders of these, usually about 30 women, 6 groups of 5 would meet, and they call the women of the leaders of these elected leaders, democracy in action at the grassroots level. They would call these women for a workshop every year, 7-day workshop on intensive training on social and economic development relative to poor women, their lives. How do you, when do you need to take your child to the hospital as opposed to just, let them kind of get better, all these things. And they would have this intensive 7-day workshop funded for years by UNICEF, who saw that, Grameen had this network, and if they could just, provide good ideas around health and nutrition and sanitation and education, it was a very efficient way to get those ideas moving in the community, because the women would go back to their centers and report out what they learned over the course of several weeks. And so that between the good ideas that these women already had circulating and bringing in, some of these powerful socioeconomic ideas from outside and letting them embed in the lives of these women and these groups, it became a very powerful way to kind of move forward on social and economic development in these, speed up the process of some of these, these better practices related to the well-being of the women and especially their children.
And well, good. And what about, Alex, what about birth control and the importance of educating the girls and delaying marriage and its effect on population growth?
Well, population rates in Bangladesh and many other developing countries have come way down as well-being increases, and there's a whole field of study. They call it the demographic transition. As a country gets wealthier, that parents they typically have a large families as kind of an insurance product. That they want to make sure that they have at least 2 sons, and so they figure they'll need 8 kids, 4 sons and 4 daughters, to ensure they have at least 2 sons survive to adulthood. And so that's one thing, and Grameen has helped, create more of that kind of well-being, and that they say, oh no, we only need to have 2 kids or 3 kids to make sure we have 2 sons. That, and there is still this bias to having sons, so that's Grameen's helped make that less so. But also it happens in other ways. If women are seen as economic assets rather than economic liabilities, then that changes the whole situation, and they're not only seen as in their role as as giving birth to children, but and if they're running a business, then just they say, well, the childbearing responsibilities, having many children, it's not possible. You're too busy to do it. But again, that Grameen helped transform women from being seen as an economic liability to to an asset. And then also Grameen developed a kind of a social constitution developed by the borrowers, but then popularized by the bank. And one of them was to keep your family small. And they tried to argue for the benefits of small families, and also to not engage in child marriage, and not to engage in the practice of dowry, which kind of devalues women. And so they tried to really change these gender roles, create economic development, create the idea that the woman could be an economic asset, and all those things combined with wider changes going on in Bangladesh and many developing countries. Birth rates started to drop, and these fears of overpopulation and starvation because of spiraling, population numbers just never really came to pass. And in fact, Grameen and other successful economic development programs played an important role in that.
So you referred to having, I guess before we're talking about microcredit, having 4 sons and hoping the 2 survive. And I think your reference is to the lack of a social security program and male children being the social security program, and the high infant mortality rate and under 5 mortality rate, which with health dropped. So so-called insurance births dropped, and I suppose that added up to a beneficial effect in dropping the overall population growth, right?
Yeah, you expressed it probably more succinctly and clearly than I did, but that's this whole idea of the demographic transition that it's been observed. We had a time in the United States where people had big families partly as insurance, and then they became with better health practices and with later Social Security, that those became less needed. And in Bangladesh and developing countries are following that path. And I think organizations like Grameen that accelerated economic development at the grassroots level just kind of made that whole process go faster. And I think it's benefiting their society, their economy, the environment, and many other things.
So, Alex, your recent writings go beyond microcredit to nonprofit and social entrepreneurship more generally. What led you to write your 2 recent books, and how do they relate to microcredit?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about them. I reached a point in my career where one of my board chairs at Grameen Foundation said, he told a story from he was an executive at Microsoft and then ran publicly traded technology companies, just a fantastic person and a great business leader. And he said he reached a point in his career where he realized that the biggest changes he would bring to his organizations wouldn't be based on what he did, but how he would do it working through others to help and empower and enable others in his organizations or social movements he cared about. And that really made me think. And I realized that I wanted to spend some time in my early 50s to write down all the things that I'd learned about social change to help a new generation of change makers. And to, because, we've solved a lot of problems in my generation, but some of them we haven't, some of them have become worse, like climate change. So I said, I've learned some stuff over the years about how you develop, how you work as a change maker, how you lead people in creating social change by studying under people like Muhammad Yunus and Sam Daly Harris, and but also through my own activities. And so I started writing about what ended up being about 800 pages of reflections, stories, just tips that from my first 30 years in the social entrepreneurship space and microfinance movement and running nonprofits. And so then I had this big, huge thing, and I found a great editor that turned 300 of those pages into basically a kind of a memoir. And this is what's called Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind, Leadership Lessons from 3 Decades of Social Entrepreneurship, where I told the story of my life, and a lot of it has to do with my connection with Grameen and with results and with Grameen Foundation. But rather than tell the stories that just make me look like, some hero, there are a few of those, but the stories are more centered around what I learned, a lesson that made me a better change maker, or a lesson that I learned about how to make change, but not have it come at a personal cost, where you're damaging yourself, you're at risk of burning out, which was one of the big lessons I learned in my 30s after almost burning myself out. And so that was this kind of a memoir, but centered around lessons learned. So probably a lot of the stories I told were mistakes that I made, but what I learned from them and how I applied those learnings. It's a kind of almost a confessional quality, or some people say I'm being too hard on myself in my own memoir. But some of the best stories of what I learned were from terrible mistakes that I've made, that just then I got a light went off, and then some of the other parts of all those writings was just a long list of lessons learned, just tips about how to manage people, about how to manage a board of directors, how to raise money. And they ended up being 214 discrete ideas or techniques or tips or hacks, as some people call them. And that became a second book, much shorter in terms of the time it takes to read. And it's called When in Doubt, Ask for More, and 213 other life and career lessons for the mission-driven leader. So when in doubt, ask for more is just one of those 214 ideas, because I learned that fundraisers typically ask for less than they should from people who can help, because they feel kind of nervous about it or uneasy, or they just don't do their research properly. So I always just say, if someone's going to ask someone for $10,000, I'd say, well, why not 25? And occasionally there's a good answer, and often there isn't. And so I try to increase their ambitions in fundraising, but in also other areas. You should have a great board of directors. You should have a great staff team. You should be triple the size of your organization. And it just means being fearless and asking people to help you get to where you want to go in terms of social and environmental change. And again, do it in a way that you're not damaging yourself and your well-being. That became one of my main philosophies about social change, that rather than brag about how hard you were working and what the cost was, I would brag about how well I was, and how I was a little bit more well every year, because I never created a dynamic where my change making was coming at a personal cost. It was not, I wanted to be better with every year, not to be kind of degrading myself, as unfortunately many nonprofit leaders do.
So that's sounds good. For those viewers who are getting excited and inspired now, I have a question for you, and also a quick announcement here. We'll have posted a website address where people can buy the books, and we've created a way for you to inscribe them and sign them, and we'll disclose that later if they go to the website. So for those viewers who are excited and inspired by microcredit, how can they get involved in the microcredit movement?
Well, there are many ways. Certainly joining one's local results group is I always encourage people to do. It's a really hands-on way to get involved in the political process and getting political support behind known solutions like microcredit. Supporting organizations like Grameen Foundation that I started, and I'm no longer involved in day-to-day, that is a great leadership team there now. Become a financial supporter, become a member of their volunteer corps called Bankers Without Borders. There's a US version of Grameen called Grameen America, which is just doing fantastic work, financial support, and trying to bring Grameen to America to your city. If they're not already there, is a great opportunity. There's an organization called Kiva that allows people to become a micro lender to people in countries throughout the world, as little as $25, I believe. Kiva.org is a great way. They created really a way that you didn't have to be a millionaire to become a player in the microfinance movement around the world. You could do it at an amount that almost anyone can afford. And then there are just so many institutions, microfinance clubs in some cities that exist, and there are groups like Finca, Women's World Banking, Accion, and that are out there. World Vision has its own microfinance arm. CARE has developed microfinance in Africa really well. So there are lots of organizations. In fact, I was part of it. We created a network of leaders of about a dozen global networks, and it's now changed their name and now called the Partnership for responsible financial inclusion. And those are some of the leading networks. Finca is a great example. So lots of ways to get involved, but again, through donations and fundraising, through volunteering, through things like Bankers Without Borders, through lending, through platforms like Kiva. There's just many ways to get involved in microfinance. It's that's how it didn't just stop as a kind of a technocratic solution to poverty. It really became a global people's movement. And I give a lot of credit to Sam Daly Harris for having the vision to do that, making it so inclusive, and that spirit continues now, and I hope will forever.
And you can be contacted to go deeper into these things and to be invited to speak and for other things through your website, which is alexcounts.com, ALEXCOUNTS.com, right?
Yeah, I think you need to put the www at the front, .alexcounts.com, but otherwise it sends you to some other strange place. But people will find it. And yes, at this point, I'm trying to spread the word about my books and doing book talks, both live and more recently virtual. I have a consulting practice where I can help nonprofits apply some of my lessons around fundraising and governance and management and leadership and public speaking and things, all things that I started off being pretty bad at, but I got a lot better at over time. And always happy to hear from people. When Muhammad Yunus replied to that letter that I wrote in 1987 when I was an intern in the results office, I had no reason to expect that he would respond, and he did. And then he opened the door for me to become involved in this great movement and change maker and study, from him. So when people approach me now, young people or people in a period of career transition or people that just want to help for any reason, I find it almost impossible not to respond to them and to give them some advice or assistance. And again, I can, I've also written a lot that's freely available on the internet about these topics that I care about. So a lot of stuff out there, but I always want to help. And, for something more, I also teach at the University of Maryland, which is very satisfying nonprofit management, but I can be hired as a consultant. But I can also just advise people for the joy and the fun of it if they're trying to make positive changes in their society and the world.
Well, we have time for a few more focused questions, so let me roll a few together. Does microcredit really work? What is the evidence about that it works? Is microcredit used here in the U.S. and does it work here?
Yeah. So, when people started seeing that loans were being repaid and that, some of the borrowers were really thriving, everyone got very excited. And so, the trick is, though, not to let anecdote guide you. And so there were a number of studies of microfinance in Bangladesh, one by a guy named Mahbub Hussain, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And it was pretty convincing, showed that a lot of the borrowers, the early growing branches, were doing very well. And then the World Bank came in and did a massive study, millions of dollars, and they found similar results. In fact, they found that of Grameen borrowers at that time, about 120,000 Grameen borrower families were coming out of poverty every year, 5% of the total. That was extremely exciting. I mean, you can imagine all of our groups use that to raise money and raise awareness. And later, some academics challenged the methodology of that second World Bank study, and it's their challenges and the researchers' refutation of those challenges, kind of above my ability to process, statistics and social science. But there, that evidence and then it became hard to research microfinance in Bangladesh because it was basically in every village and there was no control group. So they started studying in other places. And they found in other places that the impact was less than they'd seen in Bangladesh in those studies. And so some people kind of minimize that it doesn't work. It just, in my mind, it worked, but it didn't work as well as some of these studies in Bangladesh said. And you wouldn't expect anything, just like vaccines that we're developing now around the COVID. Some of them work better than others. Some work better in one context than others. And so but there became a bit of a backlash on microfinance, and they took some of these studies that showed that basically of these millions and millions of borrowers, maybe 10% or 5% or 15% were doing extremely well. Most of the rest were making modest progress out of poverty, and really no one much was being harmed. And they turned that into a kind of a negative result. Like look at it, that only a few are doing exceptionally well. And I looked at those same results and I said, that sounds pretty good. And the results in Bangladesh seem to be even better. So why are we trying to make a story out of something that is doing well, because it's not perfect. It's not
Alex,
solving everyone's. Yeah.
what about the U.S. and
Hey,
does
let me
it
get
work here, and how?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. But ultimately, we commissioned a study at Grameen Foundation to just do a study of all of the research studies that have been done around the world, and we published 3 kind of meta studies, and they're available on our website and on my website. You can look at what the data says. It's pretty encouraging. In the U.S., Grameen America got going in 2008, applied the Grameen model in Queens, in New York City, did very well, and they've been just growing at a very, very rapid pace, and showing that microfinance, a loan of $2,000 or $1,500 that might grow over time, can have as big an impact on a low-income family here as it does in Bangladesh. And we struggled to discover that and prove that in the U.S. I struggled. I tried to do it in a few cities, but ultimately, Grameen America, under the leadership of Andrea Young, and Shahnawaz was a guy who came from Bangladesh to help her. Visit their website. You'll see it's incredible stories of a Bangladesh success model having as much, if not more, impact on urban poverty in the U.S. than it does in Bangladesh. It's just a great story, and people should check it out and celebrate it and support it.
Maybe some of that needs to be put into the current COVID relief bill, the American Rescue Plan that's being negotiated right now. But let me ask you this: how does microcredit contribute to societal problems beyond poverty, such as climate change? Does it?
Well, I think it can. In fact, I was at a big conference. Mohammed Yunus was at 2015, and he came out and he said we want to develop a world of 3 zeros: 0 poverty, 0 unemployment, and 0 net carbon emissions. And he'd never taken that stand before publicly, and it was thrilling because he was adopting the climate change movement as his own. And as I say, I think we're all environmentalists now, whatever other social movements we're involved in. But Grameen had in Bangladesh had been, I think, moving many of the borrowers through a sister company called Grameen Shakti or Grameen Energy, kind of bypassing kind of the wasteful energy uses that we're so familiar to us. And they went from very basically, not using any electricity, just very basic energy consumption, and then just going straight to solar, straight to biogas, straight to wind energy. And they would finance this at the village level, in a commercially viable way. And so a sister company of Grameen is basically the largest rural solar company doing solar home installations in the world. And again, that would only be possible if Grameen had kind of laid the foundation by getting these families to trust Grameen, to get a little ahead financially so they can afford to, pay for this, and to be willing to try a new technology. Like they tried the technology of a kind of institutional loan to graduate from the loan shark, and then they were willing to test a solar home system so that they weren't necessarily burning firewood and kerosene, which are very polluting and wasteful and inefficient technologies. And so again, done in the right way, microfinance provides a platform for combating climate change at the grassroots level, and really helping the generation of poor go from kind of prehistoric type of energy use to 21st century use without going through the wasteful 19th and 20th century models that we all went through, and as a result, doing a big favor to the climate for current and future generations.
Alex, we have about a minute left, so real quickly, what's next for microcredit, the microcredit movement for you personally, and what's up regarding commercialized lenders or traditional banks having a participation in microcredit? Really quickly, we have just about a
Yeah.
minute left.
Well, I think microfinance is going to use some of the modern technology and AI to just get more efficient, more targeted, and higher impact. I think that's the potential. For me, I'm going to continue to write and do consulting and volunteering and teaching. I'll probably take on a CEO role, maybe in microfinance, one more time before I retire. And I think that the future. After we emerge from this pandemic, I think that the future of all these social movements to come together and to synergize and to kind of be guided by the leadership of people like Muhammad Yunus to address some of these fundamental flaws in society that the pandemic may lay bare. I think there were with potential on the cusp of a lot of human progress in the next 5 years.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. I hope our viewers are excited and stimulated and energized and inspired and participate in the opportunities that you've mentioned. And just want to wish you well personally. Be well, be safe, and we'll see you around the old microcredit campus.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me. And I look forward to hearing from you and from your listeners and viewers and figuring out how we can work together to create a better world.
Take care.
Bye-bye.